Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Good morning, excuse me, I should say. We're so glad to have you a part of our community this morning. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow Public Speaking and Presentations, Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow, and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn on your microphone and say hi, and I'll be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. This morning, our featured guest is Garr Reynolds, a communications consultant and author of Presentation Zen, the third edition of which was published in 2019 and is ranked by Amazon as the #2 business communications bestseller. Garr joins us from his home in Nara, Japan.
Hello everybody, my name is Garr Reynolds and I am a professor at Kansai Gaidai University. I also work as a business communications consultant and I travel all around the world and all around Japan giving presentations and helping companies such as Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and so on with their presentations. I've written 5 books about presentations. You can see some of them here. Before I joined Kansai Gaidai in 2003, I worked for Apple in Silicon Valley. Before that, I worked for Sumitomo Electric Industries in Osaka. Being a father of 2 children, 1 dog and 1 cat and 2 birds means I'm pretty busy most of the time. I love hiking and rugby and American football and playing music. I'm a drummer, but I can also play piano and bass and guitar a little bit. All right, so let's jam sometime. Bye.
See, I climbed a tall, tall mountain. I met an old man beneath the weeping willow tree. He said, "Now, if you got some questions."
Oh.
Fantastic.
How
So,
embarrassing.
Garr, welcome.
I'm not a guitar player or a singer, as should be obvious.
So, Garr, tell us, normally when I introduce a new guest, I ask them, please introduce yourself. But you already did that. Tell us why you made an introductory video, a 1-minute introductory video of yourself.
Yeah, there aren't so many of those on YouTube. There are some of them, and just as a class project, just for my university students, as a way to get them. And this was during the pandemic, so we couldn't meet, live. So YouTube, or Zoom, can be kind of boring going around the room. So use your multimedia skills to make a good 1-minute video. We all have smartphones that are far better than anything that was expensive even 10, 20 years ago. So and students really love doing that, and that way they get to edit it and just condense it down into 1 minute rather than a rambling well, I was born.
So that brings us to our the main subject of tonight's conversation, your book, Presentation Zen. So tell us about your experience, in which, of course, Presentation Zen is about doing everything as clearly and concisely as possible. Don't clutter it up. Don't repeat a lot. Get the main information out there. So tell us about your experience with presentations growing up. I know that there's a very important high school project that you did that you talk about in Presentation Zen, and it was really kind of a precursor to all the work you're doing now. It could have been easily done, or your work at Apple could have just been a further development of that.
Well, I mean, no kid has an experience with presentations per se, at least not in my generation. That maybe isn't true today. Kids probably are experimenting with multimedia, including PowerPoint and so on. But when I was a kid, we didn't. We did show and tell. But of course, the influence was, broadcast news. We all grew up watching TV. And, broadcast news is a great example of someone speaking into the camera using multimedia, in a harmonious way. Sometimes interviews, sometimes full video, images, quantitative displays, the weather. I mean, the meteorologist, that is presentation 10 right there. But when I was 17 in the final, senior year thesis, I was in a science class, a biology class, and we had 35 millimeter cameras, and we made slides. And then what we had to do, rather than write a paper, was to give, I don't know, it was 20 minutes, basically a TED Talk long before we heard of TED, for the whole school in the spring. And yeah, so it consisted of, I don't know, 60, 70, 100 slides, of different things, I was talking about water pollution and things. So it'd have lots of photos. They were just 35 millimeter images. So a person talking, beautiful images behind you. Sometimes quantitative displays. If I needed charts or graphs, I would write that on the chalkboard, then take a picture of that, wait 3 weeks, to get the slides back. And that's how I did it. I mean, this was long before people were using Mac or using any PC at all. So, and I loved it. I mean, I wasn't someone who was gregarious or needed to be in front of people. It wasn't that. But it's pretty fun. It's fun to go out and take photos. And then I like the idea of kind of being like a film director, because I'm making these beautiful images, which were beautiful. These 35 millimeter slides projected on whatever projector we had back then, like a Kodak carousel. But if you turn the lights out back in the day, yeah, they look great. Of course, the presenter would disappear, but that's that's a problem. But at least it was better than our old uncle used. Our uncles would give us slideshows of their trip to the Grand Canyon, where there was no editing, so it's just like an hour of, and here's one. Wait, who is that? Oh gosh. So it wasn't that. The idea of being, preparing, have something that's interesting, but also, of course, supports your message in benefit of the audience. So that was my first experience.
Garr, and so you touched on an important point, because we were talking about before we came on the air about, for instance, that I went to business school. The most important thing my main experience, if I was going to tell anybody what did I do at business school, I would tell them it was presentations. It was not writing a paper. I mean, and you make me think about people in the liberal arts, for instance. They're writing papers. They're learning how to, write publications. It seems like that may even be the old way of doing things, as you mentioned before. We did not have that visual. Those. We had a pen and a paper. That was a lot already. I mean, 18th century, that would have been, meant we were aristocrats. But today, maybe there's some kind of change in communication, so that it's not, I don't hand you a paper, 20-page paper, and say, okay, here's what I found out. You're going to want to have everything presented to you exactly as you're saying the meteorologist does. There's a hurricane coming there, be careful. This is what it means to you right now. So tell us about this writing presentations then, because that seems to be very, very much where we need to be coached, where today's students, today's professionals need to learn this art form, this multimedia art form. So tell us about publishing the book in 2008. Why did you write it? I know at that time, or before that time, you were a marketing manager at Apple. Tell us about writing this book and whom you wrote it for.
Yeah, so actually, in terms of the timetable, so I left Apple to become a professor at Kansai Gaidai University, because when you work at Apple, of course, you can't do things like write books, unless you're Steve Jobs or maybe one of the vice presidents. So I left Apple because, of course, being a university, a tenured university professor, that's a great gig to have. You have a lot of freedom. Of course, you have great, interaction with students and so on. So I started the Presentation Zen blog. This was when blogging was new. This is around 2005 or so. So, people didn't, blogging, what's that? And that really took off. And then people started linking to it, like Seth Godin. That's how I got to know Seth Godin, who's always endorsed, made the blurb for my books. And then after that, then publishers see it. So this is a good example of, like, if you want to be a singer, just make a YouTube channel and be discovered, right? So in those days is, well, if you want to be a writer or just change the world a little bit with your idea, well, get a blog. Today would be, I think, a YouTube channel. So publishers asked me to write a book. So I took a lot of the stuff that was on my blog over the years and then edited it, tried to make it even more visual, and yeah, published a book with, well, it's Pearson now. So Pearson, one of the big conglomerates, and now that book is in its third edition. That first book. So yeah, it's still doing well. But I look at that as being sort of foundational. I mean, each case is different, so there's no prescription like you have to do it this way. The book is visual, but there are words in it too. I mean, it's like 250 pages. So I wanted a book that would look good on the coffee table, but that people would also sit down and read and then think about. So that's my idea of reading anyway, is that you sit and you read and you think. So I do want people to think about their own situation, how they would use the principles, but in a specific way, for them, of course.
And it's a very funny you should mention the coffee table book, that kind of a publication. And that's exactly that accessibility, I think, is it goes back to what I was mentioning about this immediacy, this don't ask the person reading to delve into, don't make them have to interpret so much. You're really giving, it's a medley of written, visual, color, and then eventually, I imagine, on your blog, because it's also attached to the book, this multimedia way of presenting something, which seems to be exactly what your point is, that this is a different kind of medium. It's not written, it's not pictures, it's all of them working together toward the same goal. Is that just?
Yeah, I think it's effective, and I think multimedia is effective. It gets a bad name sometimes because, with the cable news is such a prominent thing all over the world, and a lot of the stuff looks very glitzy, and it can be too glitzy in a way that fools people too. But it can also it's supposed to be used, in good faith. And meteorologists we were talking about before, from the 50s, 60s, when I was growing up, 70s, those are, it's multimedia trying to tell a story, trying to give you the, facts of the matter. And then video itself really lends itself. So just because a lot of people do use it to manipulate, I mean, books are used to manipulate people as well. It's a good medium. And visuals are great. It's just that we don't have the education. So a lot of us can be fooled, which is why we should teach storytelling, for example, not just visuals, but understand storytelling, so that, and propaganda and things like that, so that we understand it. Wait a minute, how do they know that's true? What's the source for this information? What's the difference between opinion and statements of fact or
but in
observation?
any case, I'm sure you'll agree that the creation of an effective mode of messaging is different than the content of that message. And so, of course, like the internet, today we can find any information we're looking for, be it, the greatest, most insightful, constructive information, or some very destructive information.
Yeah,
So,
it works. I mean, and we don't get enough, education of that. We think of visual, making visuals as an art thing, just art. Well, and then put art out there maybe once a week. Same thing we do with music. Well, you're never going to get a job in music, so let's put that. In fact, let's cut that, right? So even though that could be so beneficial for communication, I mean, musicians, especially singers, vocalists, I would think, are very good at expressing themselves or just getting in front of an audience, even if you're a solo, guitar player or something. These are really good skills to have, to be able to get in front of people and to lead them or to help them. Yeah.
Sure.
So
before
things like arts and we need more of the arts, not less.
Sure. So before we go into this presenting the delivery, as you call it, let's take a look at first what is important to you when presenting. So this is, I believe you could ask, you could say it's the foundation of Presentation Zen in this video. Let's have a look.
Even before I wrote the book Presentation Zen, I was talking about the importance of simplicity and the importance of really approaching presentation in a more visual and simple way. And one of my heroes, of course, is Yoda, and Master Yoda is actually one of my senseis, you could say. So I have him here on the line, and I thought it would be good to ask him a few questions. My first question, Master Yoda, is why are people hesitant to present in a more visual and a more simple way?
Afraid people are afraid to be simple. But fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to bullet points. And bullet points lead to boredom. And boredom leads to suffering.
So what happens if people just continue with the same old way of cramming their slides full of bullet points and, reading slides and just going through point after point after point, the same old way that's been going on for since PowerPoint, I think, was invented?
Once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Consume you, it will. We need a different way.
So do you think it's important for teachers, medical doctors, nurses, engineers, whoever, those people who are out there and learning a more visual and a simple approach, do you think it's important for them to share?
Always pass on what you've learned. This is what believe I must.
Okay, so is it important to use any particular software?
Software matters not. But difference it can make.
Okay, so Sensei, what software do you use? I mean, what's the name of the software?
Told you I did.
You did? What? The name of the software is
So certain are you? Know it all you do. No.
Fantastic. Wow. So
I have too much free time.
Garr, so this brings us to our first roundtable. Are we all graphic designers now? Has technology allowed us all to create and give professional multimedia presentations? And what was it like before the digital era? So you mentioned bullet points, or Yoda does. He says that's leads to bullet points. Tell us a little bit about, to start this roundtable, tell us about, link those slides that your uncle would show you about his trip to the Grand Canyon to then this PowerPoint, this idea of the PowerPoint slide, and what presentations were like before now, and how that kind of brought us over. In business school, I remember, of course, reading your book, presentations then, and when I arrived at the class or at a presentation, of course, the fellow students, they look at my slides and they say, 50 slides? Are you crazy? How'd you do that? And they'd say, I just have, 3. And of course, their slides were just jammed with, all sorts of information, where mine just had, no bullet points, just had a picture or something. So tell us about this new idea, and we'll get into whether all of us are now graphic designers.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's a new idea. Getting back to the uncle, he was showing visuals, but they're visuals that we didn't care about. And we may have been interested for the first minute or two because it was new, but then it gets old pretty quick. In the same way, I guess, the brain is not interested in looking at a screen of bullet points. Now, bullet points can be very effective, occasionally used even in a presentation. Certainly in a document, they can be very effective as a summary and so on. But slide after slide of sentences that basically repeat what you're saying, and if they don't repeat what you're saying, it's even more distracting, perhaps, because I'm reading that and not listening to you. So the other thing that's similar, I guess, is that the uncle, let's say Uncle Rico, he didn't really think about the audience. I want to show this. It's an hour long. I don't care. I want to do this. And it's the same with doing bullet points or a boring presentation. It's easy to do. So we're not really thinking about the audience. I have to give a presentation. It's about me and what's easy for me. And what's easy is to just do an outline and do point after point after point. Whew, okay, done. Well, I guess that's better than forgetting everything you're going to say in front of an audience, but it's really not worth it. You should just call the presentation off. What's the point? You'd be much better served even just using a whiteboard, which in Apple, and when Steve Jobs, when he would speak, he would just have when it was like company-wide, he would just have a piece of paper maybe in his hand just to remind him some key things, but mainly the paper was down by his side and he's just talking. I never see him use slides in the company, but of course on a big stage it's very useful. And we tried to model that, but a lot of don't want to get off topic, but a lot of the employees go to MBA schools. So, and that's where they've learned. They proudly, I remember one guy going, I learned it. I went to Northwestern. yellow type, 14 point, make it a little bigger on the blue background. Like this is the NBA way of doing things. This is 20 years ago. But anyway, being able to speak in front of an audience, actually using a whiteboard, is much more engaging than a list of bullet points. And Steve Jobs had no, I mean, there are stories about this, and I think people have written about it. Do not go to a Steve Jobs presentation and pull out slides of any kind, because people would come in from, advertising companies or whatever, younger people that didn't know, and they prepared so well for their presentation, even if their visuals were good. But you have to know your audience. And, so, and some executives are not going to tolerate even one slide. So they just want to, or she just want to sit down and talk to you. So
Okay.
that's rule number one too, is know your audience.
And Garr, so going back to this idea of we are taught in school to read and write. We are not really focused on pictures. Pictures are considered a lower, how shall I say, academic form of understanding, right? And so this is, in other words, you're saying, when you say know your audience, and you're saying these people who went to the MBA at Northwestern, they are putting they're writing down a document on a slide because they want all of the information to be there, just like they would want all the information in a document. And you're saying, no, that is, if you're going to give them a document, give them a document. These slides are not used to put up redundant information. They're not used to have, otherwise you can just leave as a presenter and have them read it on the slide, right? You're saying this is, it is ontologically a different form of presenting knowledge. It's a different medium. And so you need to use then these pictures, or use the slide in a way that you can, I would say, show a different world to your audience, right? You want to take them, use what is at your disposition to get your point across. So tell us a little bit about this then. What is this multimedia effect that you talk about? Narration with pictures, visuals is better than narration alone. This is leading back to the audience point.
Well, this is from the book, but there is some research into this. So the one book called Multimedia Learning, and there's some research into this, and there's some principles, like the multimedia effect, which just says that generally speaking, narration with visuals is better than just narration alone. Although if you have really bad visuals that are distracting, I guess the opposite could be true. But generally what they found, and with people, looking at online instructions and things, the visual really amplifies the spoken word, and trying to get as much of the extraneous stuff, including text that you don't need, try to get that off. They just found that led to better understanding and better recall later on. And I found that with my students as well. I mean, I've done it, it's anecdotal, but many times I've done things where I would show quantitative displays to show this trend or this fact, and then I would do the same thing but without any visuals. I would just explain it, but I never had any visual associated with it. And then when the students took a test about it, 2 days later, the students who had a visual with it overwhelmingly had much better recall than the students who just heard it. So
Fantastic.
Here, plus C, what is a cup? This is a cup. I could describe my cup, my this Starbucks from Paris, right? I could describe but if I just show it and then talk about it, and I spend whatever, it should be obvious. It's a cliche almost to say it, but a picture is worth 1,000 words, and pictures, quantitative displays are pictures as well. So line charts, bar charts, whatever, that helps people see it and then remember it.
And Garr, maybe can you give us just a definition? I mean, this word multimedia is thrown around all the time. I don't think I could give you a concise definition. What does it mean to you? What do you mean when we're talking about the effect of multimedia? What is multimedia then? Is it also the person speaking, giving a talk up there? Is it the cup, the mug, Starbucks mug you just held up? How do you define that?
I maybe you call it multi-input or multi-visual, because this is this media? I don't know. It's not digital, and it doesn't have to be digital, of course, because when we had 35 millimeters, that was visual. But yeah, anything that you can use. So props, I mean, you don't have to be like Carrot Top, but having props is very effective. I mean, Carrot Top is nothing without his props, but we can use whatever we have around us, can be very effective. And in conjunction with video and the screens, which are better than ever. And we don't have to turn off the lights in many cases, at least in education. So yeah, I don't have a definition of multimedia. As much as much different sources as you can find, so long as it's not distracting.
Fantastic. And so this would be then going back to talking about your uncle and his trip. This is the knowing your audience is really. Would you say it would be just to say, instead of him telling you about his trip, or as you said, giving his presentation for himself, he would be then doing what he could to take you there. The best case scenario being he brings you there in
Sure.
person. But this, in other words, the presentation would be the best substitute for that, to bring you into this world, to present you with new information. Is that more or less the gist of this whole idea?
Well, yeah, you have to think about where is the audience now, and then where is it you want to take them. In the case of the uncle's 35 millimeter slides, that it's not really an important thing, but his main goal should be to entertain. So he would think, well, I'm not going to do an hour. I'll just do like 10 minutes of this. No one ever did that back in my day. No one thought, well, I don't want to waste people's time. I got the family here. And so he could do it. He could have, and that's why I'm a big fan of, or proponent of filmmaking, and that all students should learn filmmaking, even if nothing else, for better home movies, because we all have now thousands of hours of stuff that will never be seen by our children and grandchildren and our families that 300 years from now. Wouldn't it be nice if there were nice 3 minutes or even 10 minutes, if they were good, kind of documentaries? If you could go back and imagine our great grandkids in the future. And we don't have that skill. Most people don't have that skill. And TikTok isn't enough. That's not going to be that's in the now. That's not going to really stand up, I don't think. So there's a real need for good storytelling, and also how to use visuals to tell stories.
Great. And right before we go into the next principle, storytelling, can you also give us a definition of that? What does that mean exactly? I know multimedia journalists, for instance, they're considered storytellers. What is a storyteller?
Yeah, I mean, the classic thing, right, is you take people on a journey, and there's some conflict. There needs to be a conflict that people get over, or fail to get over. That would be fine. I mean, no one cares if you came out and said, well, let me tell you my life story. I was born rich and handsome as you can see, married a beautiful person, so rich that I just don't, no problems. It's been an amazing life. No one cares. Storytelling is almost always about problems, and problems that you overcame. I mean, there are many definitions of story, but also, like in photography, what do we mean when we say story? You might have a picture of a castle on the lake. It's beautiful, but that's just it. Say it was taken at noon. There's not really much of a story there. But if you did it from a different angle, where there's like mist, the morning mist is coming up, and then you see a little boat and people walking off the boat. Oh, you have kind of a story, right? There's a story of, here's tourists going to this castle. It's morning. There's, what I mean? There's lots of information. We can use our imagination a little bit, rather than just looking at photos or film, frame too, as just objects. But rather, how can we, try to tell more of a story through different angles, or time of day, or waiting for the right, thing. Oh, I remember once, for example, if you're taking a film, or it could be a photo of a beautiful mural, it's hard to have the scale of it, right? So I remember I saw a person, coming. It was probably a 5-minute walk, but I needed a person to walk past the mural, because I thought it would look more interesting, but plus it gives scale. How big is this? A really huge mural. It's really cool. And this is in Kobe in Japan. So little things like that. Well, there's a story. It also, here's this person. Is she lonely? I don't know. She's alone early in the morning. There's just more information, rather than just taking snaps. Like we're at Disneyland. You kind of have to, good photographers are always waiting and thinking about, and filmmakers, of course, too, rather than just shooting it.
Garr, and so to go back to make a little summary of what you said, so the story can be kind of dramatic, or it should have some kind of, as you mentioned, some kind of challenge, some kind of struggle to overcome, or something, and then the other one would be more just descriptive. But when you're talking about that, does that go back to connecting with the audience? Is that the way? Is that the medium through which? Is that the way that we are sure that we are connecting with the audience? Is that why
Yeah.
it's a storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, you have to make the audience feel. I mean, storytelling, especially filmmaking or photography. I mean, you have to make the audience feel something. So that's where, I mean, I've seen a presentation on insurance, which seems so boring, right? Insurance or safety, but the person told the story of what happens when this person didn't have insurance, and it wasn't told in a way to scare people. It wasn't a sales presentation anyway, but that just really brings it home. So yeah, this is why you have insurance. Or one was on safety. Think people think, well, I don't need to wear a hard hat. What can it, and you tell these stories about where it saved someone's life, and not in a way that really takes advantage of people's emotions, but I mean, in a negative way or a sort of manipulative way. But it is, I think Ken Burns was asked this before when it's like, did you put that in there? Because it made me cry. I mean, did you know that? And he's like, yeah, I know that. I put that in there so that you would feel something. Yeah. And again, it's not in a way that we're trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes, but storytelling almost always is, yes, making people feel as well as understand.
Fantastic. And so that is, would you say, going back to the meteorologist, the idea, the metaphor of a meteorologist, where this meteorologist, he or she is telling you, be careful over here, hurricane coming, or go out and enjoy right now because you've got some beautiful
Yeah.
weather. So it's really that kind of connecting with the people through sharing information. Is that it? Sharing
Yeah.
a story somehow? Is that it?
Yeah, I was trying to think of, more recently there's been pushback on this because every time there's a typhoon or hurricane, I guess it's called out where you guys are, they put a poor reporter out in a, 100-mile-an-hour gale force wind, like, yeah, we know it's dangerous. Don't. And so then you've lost people because I know you're storytelling, but but now you're trying to manipulate us. Or when someone is like struggling in the water, it's horrible out here, and then someone just walks by, casually behind them. So, you have to be authentic. I mean, I don't think you should try to just dramatize things for that sake, or to try to kind of fool people. I don't think you can fool people anyway.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's go on, please, to our master class. This is preparation tips from Presentation Zen. So let's take a look right now, Garr. Let's have a look and see what we have on your website. We have some great information over here, and I want us to take a look at what exactly is a makeover of a slide. So you can kind of tell us what is going on here, how we're supposed to what exactly this is talking about. So we covered that right now. Make it visual, showing the cup, and then the before after slides. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so the example here, and of course we learn through before after, and the brain, what we know about the brain loves before after, comparing. The brain loves to compare things. So, big and small, rich and poor, rough and smooth. That's why these TV shows like The Greatest Loser or something, these like diet shows, or any transformation TV show where people somehow change, fashion or something, because that makes the brain go. And in Japan, we say, eh. This is a very common Japanese expression, like surprise. So audiences will go, right? There's this. When I worked at Apple, people thought I was really strange because I lived here so long. My way of speaking changed. When I'm surprised, I make that sound. But anyway, so this, you can really see the before. So that blue slide is like a typical, it's not overly complicated, but talking about, rice consumption. Your brain doesn't care about that slide. And by the way, it's a bilingual slide. So, the key thing, if you have two languages, which is, often might be the case, might have English, plus French, for example, if you're in France at an international company, it can be very messy when you keep those languages the same size. So in signage around Japan, for example, Japanese is really large, and then there'll be English and sometimes Chinese and Korean below that. So I think this one is going, is it going down? All right, because of the way the square space works out, it's actually moving down is when the after slide is. So if you go from the top left, then it goes down. So then the after was two slides, 1962 and 2016. And there's an animation. So those 6 bowls or 5.5 bowls of rice kind of morph into 2.5 if you did it live. And this is one of the examples where I'd show students. Students never remembered the blue slide. The group of students where I talked about this, they couldn't remember what I talked about. But the students where I showed the after slide, and talked about rice consumption, they always remember the exact number, which is around 2.5. Then if you go on the right side, from a different way of doing it, you could say like start and tell a story. So in 1962, this by the way is my wife's family in 1962. And then so going down, staying on the right side, we can see there was 5.4 bowls of rice. And then if we go down modern time, 2016, you see that, and it just follows the same. It just goes down again. So you're kind of using, rather than just one static slide, you broke that up into 6 or 8 slides to tell the story. It just depends on what your point is. So if we go on the left side, you see the, if you go up just a little bit, that the businessman eating his bento. Okay, stop right there, please. So 1962, that's actually my father-in-law. But so in those days, it's called metabol syndrome in Japan, metabol. You know, it's when people don't look obese or maybe overly overweight, but they actually are overweight. So their metabolic rate is not great. So in 1962, Japanese ate a lot more rice and people were fitter. Now we have more metabol syndrome, and stress is a big cause of that. So you show a visual. You don't mention it, but you just talk about stress. It's a different world, people overworking, eating at their desks, and so on. So that's just an example. So there'd be more storytelling in with these visuals.
Fantastic. So you're
And then
really
if we go
bringing
down
that point
below,
home.
oh, I'm sorry.
You're really bringing that point home by, as you mentioned, showing the man there at the computer. So it's really, we can all identify with that. And what's going through my mind also is the idea of the 2.5 bowls of rice rather than the, how is it many, 5.4 bowls, is that 2.5 bowls, yeah, then we can all really identify with that, right? That's
Yeah.
an individual portion, isn't it?
Sure. And you could do it that way, or show bar charts to show. That's typically what students will do too, and that's fine. So are there any other examples below this? I think that was a longer one. Oh yeah, more examples. So these are just before, just go left. I think just left. Wait, these are before. Oh, I see. It's going down again. So it's I wanted to go left to right, but in Squarespace template wouldn't do that. When it goes, when it changes it to mobile, then it kind of messed it up. So that's why I did it this way. So you look at the blue one before sample one, and then after sample one. These are just examples. Or on the right, before and then after.
And so what we see on both these two slides, the after are they're much clearer. They use the colors that stand out, and then, for instance, even the eat one here after sample 5, the arrow is pointing to the information that we're supposed to look at. Is that right?
Right. So that, and then there's also the closure effect. That is, the visual bleeds off the edge. So, you know, it's just more natural way. I mean, artists know this. They do this all the time where, you know, they'll paint objects to go off the edge. So that rather than looking, in this case, it would look like a photo. I mean, people who look at this aren't conscious of that. But yeah, when you see that, it's an arrow or something like an arrow is kind of pointing people to the key data, which is the 47% of the money.
Fantastic. Wonderful. So Garr, let's move on now to the some other presentation tips. Can you tell us how do you start when you are doing when you are going to make a presentation? What should you do? I imagine that it's a slightly different approach than your colleagues from Apple who got an MBA at Northwestern University. What is your strategy if you would give a class and say, okay, what are we going to do now?
What you mean, if I was to present, or if I was going to teach presentation?
Yes, exactly. Give us some tips. What exactly? What are we supposed to do when we first start making? You have someone who's just bought PowerPoint or a Yoda program. What do we do?
Yeah, well, that's the last thing, is to turn on a computer. So I know a lot of people like to organize, and you know that's fine if that's what you want to do. But don't open PowerPoint yet, for sure. But I think it's really good to get away from technology as much as we can. So I use notebook, or I use whiteboard most of the time. I have big whiteboards in my office. I did at Apple. The whole wall was whiteboard material. So it's just a way to really, it just helps your thinking. You have this whole big space to sketch out your ideas. So again, you focus on the why. Why am I giving this presentation? You know, what is it, and why? Who's it for? So who's it for? How can this help them? What is the purpose? Why am I doing this? what is the end? What is my really end game? Not end that I'm trying to sell something or I'm trying to get a grade, but in terms of the content and this audience, what am I trying to accomplish? The problem with education, I don't want to get off topic, but it's often to teach, to regurgitate something back to, say, a professor who already knows this stuff, which shouldn't be the way it's done. That's, I would rather see unique research and presented in a way that tries to teach or, to share something. Which is what conferences are supposed to be, right? They're supposed to be, and they often are, good conference presenters, that they're sharing something that we didn't know. It's new information. I didn't know that. And this person is teaching it to us in an engaging way.
But Garr, wouldn't you say that anybody who's giving a presentation in general, they're trying to bring you some kind of new information or a new perspective, or there's a reason. Otherwise, if everybody knew it already, then it would be comic, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's why, in a way, school doesn't prepare students often, because when you get to a company even, well, you're supposed to share what's new or what's controversial or what's difficult or whatever. But often in school, it's you repeat back what the teacher already knows or what everyone already knows. So it's, to get a grade. Is this right? Did I do it correctly? Rather than, create something new or show that you understand this, but in a way that also bring something new, which is what, that's creativity, right? It's supposed to be.
And Garr, tell us, when this prepare with the end in mind, what was the end of the insurance presenter who was telling you about the importance of that helmet? Was that the end? Wear a helmet? What was that? What was his end?
I was sort of mixing up ones, but one was on safety. The insurance one wasn't actually for selling or it wasn't selling that day, but actually for people who do sell insurance, to remind them, how important this is. That it's kind of a motivational talk as well, because there's always like some details you have to know, which can be boring. Like these some rules for the employees, but this was more motivational too. Like, don't forget why we're in this. Why are we in this game of being an insurance agent? I recall at the time.
So the end could be then to remind the insurance sellers that they have something very important to do. They have to remind other people. They have to bring this message to those people that's really important. Would that be the end?
It wasn't just trying to get compliance out of the employees, but to motivate them, not stick and carrot way, but just to remind them that our job is important. What we do matters, and story really lends itself to that.
Lovely. So we have the third, know your audience as much as possible.
Yeah, these first three all kind of go together, but so just you find out as much as you can. If it's a conference presentation, I mentioned Steve Jobs before, so if you're going to present before, back a long time ago, when Steve was alive, if you had to go, but any CEO, if you have to, or anyone who you don't know, is to try to find out information. Like that would be a really nice warning. Let's say I prepared, like I want to do this really nice multimedia thing, but someone tells me, there's only going to be 3 people there. Oh, 3 people. Well, then maybe I'll just create a document and stand at a whiteboard or just discuss around the table. So you really need to know the situation. Yeah, the size of the hall, what kind of situation, the audience, all of it. Is it a general audience? Are they all physicists? If they're all physicists, or are they different kinds of scientists, or are they scientists and business people? Well, that's very different.
Fantastic. And then the fourth, keep it simple. What do you mean exactly by that?
Well, that's a good, general principle of keeping it simple, but usually that means to cut out what you don't need. So that's where editing comes in, whether it's writing or it's making a presentation or editing a video. You always want to go back and look at it and I want to cut as much as I can, cut the superfluous. Don't be afraid to be simple. Most people are afraid because they're afraid the audience or someone in the audience will go, well, why didn't you say, you could say A through Y, and then you're afraid someone will say, excuse me, what about Z, right? You didn't say Z, I noticed that. So you can't do everything. And this is just 10 minutes in time, or 5 minutes, or even if it's an hour, that's not a very long time compared to how much you know and how much you could cram in there. So rather than try to cram it in, try to really connect and go deeper with the audience that you have.
And Gar, does that go back then to the prepare with the end in mind? Because as you mentioned, it's not about knowing everything. It's about giving a message. And so does that keep it simple and know what you're
Right.
know the end
Yeah, I
game?
mean,
Is that the same?
exactly. I think a lot of people, including me, sometimes dismiss a lot of TED Talks. So, of course, some are great, but even those that get dismissed, you have to think. Remember, this is only 10 minutes. They're very short. They're not trying to teach you everything about this thing. Mainly, those are inspirational. They're trying to motivate you, and then you'll look into it more deeply. And if you went to an actual TED, I only went to the one in 2009, but you watch a presentation, but then afterwards, it's all the discussion. You talk with people around, you find the presenter, you buy their book or whatever it is. So you have to really know that often if there's short presentations like that, even at a conference, these are my findings. I have a 50-page paper which is also simplified from the data, but here's 50 pages, that you can download. Here's you put a QR code. I think that hopefully that's becoming more common, where in your last slide could be a QR code. Here's the paper, right? Or here's my 2-hour video that I made on this. And then people can get out their phones and take a picture of that. I've seen that, and I do that even with online talks, and people seem to be really excited, and they get their phone out. they go to the website.
Fantastic. So Gar, now I just want to bring us now to these design tips. So when you eventually do start building because before I think we were just generally talking about the preparing. We had our computer closed.
Mm-hmm.
We were brainstorming, getting ready to get the general idea about what we were going to do. Now we're moving on to the slides. Let's take a look at your design tips. Tell us exactly what we're supposed to do here. So the very first one, again, keep it simple. Let's see what that looks like here. There is the slide itself that you've made. So how would that be different then? We don't have anything to compare with that with,
Well,
but
yeah,
tell us about this.
Those are 3 bullet points. So this could be but it's actually number 2, which is the slide of irony. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with bullet points from time to time, and especially this is a document as well. But this is a slide that I actually used. And there are a lot more lessons than this, so it is simplified. You'll note there's lots of white space. The photo that I took of the Silver Pavilion in Kyoto is not unrelated, because this is where, there's a lot of what we think about traditional Japan is often from that time period. It's bilingual, but you'll notice that the Japanese below the English is not at the same size or same contrast level, because that is a little bit, you can't have both of them at the same intensity, just to keep it simpler for scanning. And then it's stylistically. So, I mean, I use this like it's not washi paper, but it's a kind of aged, paper with tape keeping the photo up. So that is decorative, but there's nothing wrong with noise. So, signal versus noise. This could be considered noise, anything that's decorative, but that doesn't mean it's always bad, because you're adding an emotional element. So It's all about having a balance. So, and I go through this. So that's just easy to see, simple, clarity, clutter-free. This is my slide of irony. You could think of a more visual way to do this, but I have a discussion. I have audience always talk with the people next to them and come up with like 4 things. Like, what is a visual message? Like a sign, a poster, it could be a billboard. But I think the first thing is the visual elements should support the idea of getting attention of the audience. And then those visual elements should help understanding as quickly as possible. And number 3, hopefully those visual elements, like a bar chart even, will help people remember that data or that message later on. And then often, at least in the case of advertising for billboards and things, we hope it leads to some action. But even in presentation, live presentation, a doctor could be presenting on something, trying to get people to eat less sugar. So, that 4th thing, lead to an action of, reducing the sugar consumption, could also be part, and those visuals should try to help lead to that final goal.
Absolutely, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the lead to an action simply means that your presentation is relevant to the lives of the people who are listening to the presentation or attending.
Yeah, I mean, and the action could, I mean, it could be as simple as they did well, they remembered it and did well on a test, but I don't, I tend not to think in terms of just testing, but usually, obviously with advertising that we see everywhere, that action is to buy something, but, you know, or public service announcements are to change a behavior. And doctors are often concerned with changing behavior, of course, or other
Okay,
medical professions want to change behavior.
so there we have it.
And by the way, I link to, is this where I link to a lot of the images? Where can you get good images for free if you go up a little
Oh,
bit?
yes, we
So
have it right there.
yeah, so I just put a link there. Of course, if you, you know, I belong to, no, I mean, I subscribe to, is it Motion Array? Not a sponsor. But if you're anyway serious of, making good presentations or video, then it's really helpful to have stock resources. But for free, these are really good. In fact, Pixels is amazingly good, and my students use that for their filmmaking projects. So the first two are the best, I think, on there. Unsplash is Unsplash. Pixabay is good, but Pixels.com is excellent, and it's
And
free.
so, Gar, you would, when we're talking about these places, I've presented them also to other people, and I've said, oh, if you need pictures, go to one of those websites. And would you say that this is what these sites are pretty much kind of like an encyclopedia, what the encyclopedia would be to words or a dictionary. It's really, it's a place where you can look up different images that represent something. And so that we should just take a look at, go through them and say, okay, well, what is it if I'm looking for somebody smiling like this
Yeah,
woman,
yeah.
and just kind of start to go into this idea of, okay, well, how do I tell a story through these pictures? So, and what I mean to say is, so are you're telling us that we need to become acquainted with this storytelling through pictures. So we have to start to, in order to do that, just like, getting acquainted to literature by reading books, we've got to start looking at a whole bunch of pictures. And so these are good places to start.
Yeah, but restraint is really important because good stock images shouldn't look like stock images. So I even prefer people as much as possible, use your own images, even if they're not the best, because they'll be completely yours and they're authentic that way. It just depends on what you're talking about. But let's say it's something about related to education. If you could show images from your own school in your own classroom, your own field trips and so on. So the
Fantastic.
examples that are you're just showing there, for example, one is sort of more abstract, like children and well, it depends on the books are uniquely portable magic. Okay, it depends on the context. Yes, Stephen King did say that, but it was a presentation to elementary school teachers. So that's why kids and how reading can help them or whatever. So it just depends on the audience. And the one about part-time workers, yeah, shows a waitress in Japan. So that's one of the part-time jobs, and that's relevant. And of course, I don't want to take pictures of strangers and use them in my presentation. So these are cleared, so they're easier to use in presentations that way.
But then we could, going back to the idea of all of us being graphic designers, we should start to think about taking our own pictures,
Oh yeah,
about looking at the world, thinking about the images that we could take to present information visually, to
yeah.
present
And
a
so
story visually.
when I say we're all graphic designers or all filmmakers, of course we all are not those things, but I mean it in the sense of we should say we are all writers. Now we're not all Hemingway or Stephen King or even a journalist, for the newspaper. But we all can write, and writing is extremely important, and we should write better. And most people actually don't write well because it's not easy. So you don't have to be George Lucas or Martin Scorsese, but you should learn the principles and get better at it, because you can do your own little projects. I have students who are working inside companies making really good content for Instagram, for example, but they learn from filmmaking skills how to make good stuff for these are big companies that they work for, or they're making training videos inside the company, good training videos, not awful things that we used to make with our VHS cameras.
So these are, and as we mentioned at the beginning of the hour, the tools of the future. These are the, how shall I say, the literacy of the future, right? This is the way, this is a multimedia literacy that we will be seeing more and more of, as all of these fantastic tools become our domain, whereas before, as you mentioned, they were really something of meteorologists and news anchors. So,
Yeah.
Garr Reynolds, tell us, what do you wish presenters everywhere of today and of tomorrow?
Well, I don't know. I mean, not everyone has to be a presenter, of course. There are people, and nothing wrong with kind of, being shy or introverted and wanting to stay away from the stage. That's perfectly acceptable. But for those who want to further their career or just make a difference in or out of their career, presentation is really key for that. What I would say is to ignore a lot of the templates that companies put out, but to simplify. And the lessons for presenters are actually often in filmmaking, I think, in the historical, visual storytelling of photography and filmmaking, and look at those ways, how those, arts have really affected people over the years. And there are great lessons we can take from there rather than just following the same old way that's always done. But
Fantastic.
it's a huge topic, which is why I've written many books about it, and can talk until the cows come home. But each case is different. I think the only thing I've changed is that I've realized that, of course, not everyone needs to be an awesome presenter. It's very where writing can really benefit almost everyone. I've come to appreciate more. Some people really don't want to do that, and we shouldn't force people to do that. But for those who might just be a little apprehensive and are willing to be pushed a little bit, then of course it can really open up their world.
Fantastic. Let's see how we can stay in touch with Garr. First of all, let's see how we can get the book. There it is. Amazon.com/shop/presentations. So, Garr, we can buy the book here, and we can buy, in fact, any of your stuff that you have for sale. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess I'd forgotten about that, but that's on my website. Yeah, but any place, just Google presentations and book.
Well,
Third
fantastic.
edition is what's out. You can get it on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold.
Fantastic. In the third edition, there it is. And let's see how we can stay in touch with Garr. Here's his website, garrreynolds.com. So, Garr, if people want to reach out to you after seeing this, they can just click on the contact and write you an email. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that email will be sent to me or sent to my assistant, but it's forwarded on to me. Or it might
Wonderful.
even be directly to me. But yes, I always answer.
So people can reach out to you with questions about presenting or about your
Sure.
uncle's trip to the Grand Canyon or whatever. Okay, wonderful. So there we have it, garrreynolds.com, and just contact him through there. Garr Reynolds, thank you so very much.
All right. Thank you.
So-
Bye-bye.
So
Wait.
let's see what's coming up next week. We have Chamber Music America. Classical music insiders know about an extraordinary organization headquartered in New York City. Chamber Music America is a charitable organization whose sole mission is to develop, support, and strengthen the chamber music field in the United States. CMA CEO Kevin Kwam-Lukes and his 8-person team are right off stage supporting chamber musicians all over the nation by providing them tailor-made professional resources and benefits. CMA offers 6 different grant programs, multimodal networking opportunities, an annual conference, and the quarterly publication of its flagship chamber music magazine. Are you feeling left out because your chamber music isn't all that classical? As recently as the turn of the millennium, Chamber Music America redefined chamber music by including jazz and world music genres, and since 2016 has made quote-unquote diversity, equity, and inclusion a primary focus of its work. Nevertheless, as the organization acknowledges, bold restructuring won't be easy. CMA was chartered to promote a form of European classical music that is exclusive in nature. Ethnomusicologists surely not in agreement, while pointing out that music divides people as much as it unites them. In fact, didn't the elite cellist Yo-Yo Ma and pianist Emmanuel Axe just perform the Our Shared Humanity classical chamber music concert at the world's most exclusive forum? Come welcome Chamber Music America CEO Kevin Kwan-Lukes to our show for an inclusive look at the future of chamber music. That is Chamber Music America on Wednesday, this Wednesday. So we look forward to seeing you then. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simeonmoro.com. Once again, thank you so much to Garr Reynolds. Thank you to Agnieszka and Benoit Rivolet for their support of this show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants who make it all worthwhile. From Nara, Japan, and New London, New Hampshire, goodbye and see you on Wednesday.
Sayonara.